Let me now go back to that and bring in climate as well. Of course, a lot of countries around the world, and arguably the developing world in particular, because they are suffering the most the consequences of climate change without having necessarily caused much of it. They will have to spend significant resources in mitigating the effects of climate change, adapting to climate change, which also puts pressure on their existing potentially tight budgets. So where does the World Bank come in this? And again, I'm thinking about the impact that that will have also from the World Bank and others on those governments.
So multiple ways, right? I mean, the first one is how can we help with some of that financing for that adaptation, right? Which is kind of what they have to do, resiliency. Whether it's school roofs being painted white instead of the red on a tin so that the temperature inside the room is lower, that's not sophisticated, all the way to heat-resistant varieties of seeds and drip irrigation and sea walls in a Pacific island so that you can help to build up the defenses for that. In Tuvalu, when I was there, that's something we were financing.
But you're talking about debt again. So this
No,
is
no, no.
lending.
Remember, this
is expertise.
Deeply concessional and grant money.
Okay.
Remember, this comes from IDA, a lot of this.
Okay.
And IDA is basically the part of the bank that caters to 78 of the least advantaged countries. About 30% of IDA money is pure grant.
Yeah, but those countries, and I think you quoted this recently, still pay more in interest repayments, right?
They do. Yeah. But if you give them 30% of the money as grants, and that's what helps a great deal.
Yeah.
Because you have to find a way to get them to be able to afford to do this. Otherwise, you're not helping them.
Yeah.
And so it's the concessional financing is key to this whole thing. And it's a combination, in the case of Pacific Islands, it's a combination of concessional financing from us, concessional financing from places like the Australians who do it in the form of bilateral aid, and concessional financing from the Asian Development Bank. And the three of us put together try and create the envelope to make this work.
Yeah.
So adaptation financing is one part of it, and we're trying to put half the money we put towards climate work in the bank. We're trying to make it go over time towards adaptation. Mostly because we realize that these countries need the reassurance of being able to find a way to cope with this. But then there are other ways too. So for example, we launched what we call the climate resilient debt clauses. What that is in English, because the words are complicated, is if you're a small island nation in the Pacific Islands or a small state in the Caribbean or other places, and you get hit by a weather event like a hurricane, and now we're going to expand it to include droughts and floods and other things of that type, or a pandemic. How do you cope with that? You could lose double digits of your GDP in the course of one day. And then how do you cope with that? So what we've said is any loans that are due to us, principal and interest, we will waive for 2 years if the severity of that event crosses a certain level. And if we do that, that gives you 2 years of breathing room to focus on rebuilding and looking after your people before you have to repay. In the same way, we said to them, if you have current projects approved with us and the money has not been fully drawn down, on the day you get hit by an event like this, you could take 10% of the undrawn money and use it the next morning for your immediate relief needs. So all we are trying to do is within the frame of banking, there is concessional money and there is free money and then there's fully priced money. Within the frame of those, how can we work this the best possible way for those countries?
Okay. One of the other issues with dealing with climate change is not only how much money is needed to fund those developments, but also how to measure actually the impact of what you are putting in, what it's going to generate, right? So there are lots of initiatives around the world to try to account better for climate and nature as well. And so how complex is it, and what are you doing to ensure that the funding that goes to deal with climate change also ends up generating jobs?
So there are multiple issues there, right? And the first issue is that you're putting money in. The question is, what's the output? And our new scorecard, which is 22 items instead of 150 in the past, is actually output-oriented, not input-oriented. So it'll measure how many girls went to school because of schools you put together, or how many people went to a skilling institute and got a better job, or how many greenhouse gas emissions you've avoided because of projects we've done, or how much methane you've absorbed because of things we've done, and so on. So it's output-oriented. And in fact, if you go onto our website and see the new scorecard that just got rolled out, 20 out of the 22 items are ready for measurement. You can click down to individual projects to see the impact of an individual project. So the idea is to create transparency. Now, we won't always get it right, but at least it'll be out there in the open of what we are doing. The multilateral development banks have come to an agreement, which we hope to announce in COP29, of how we will measure climate metrics commonly, so that someone like you can look across the multilateral development banks and not have to reconcile my measurement with the way the other one measures, but we'll all measure it the same way. And I think that'll be quite helpful as well for everyone to be able to track what we're doing. The third part of your question, which is implicit, is that eventually, if some countries are doing a good job, either through forestry or things with agriculture or things with methane avoidance or others, can we help them monetize the carbon credits in a way? And that's really complicated so far. We're working on 2 or 3 things there. One is to combine different registries around the world into one global registry. We're working with the government of Singapore to enable that, so that you can have one way, transparent way of accounting for carbon credits. They can't be used a second time. They can be traded with transparency and so on. And then we're trying to train 30 to 40 countries on how to actually account for their carbon credits by counting up what they're doing without allowing them to be mistaken in their calculations. And then in the case of forestry projects where we're directly involved, in 15 countries, we have said that in the next year, and they're underway in all of them, we will do an environmental audit and a social audit of the projects where we're involved. And what's the idea of a social audit? That the money that comes from selling the credits should go to the communities, so that they're not incented to go back to cutting a tree when you turn your back.
Sure.
Because they're cutting those trees for livelihood. So if you give them the money, hopefully that helps to move them to a different way of livelihood. And the second, the environmental audit, is to show that in that project, you're not cutting trees here and planting them here, so that net, there's a positive effect. Those kinds of moving of the dial forward, each of them is fraught with challenges, are the kinds of things we're trying to do.
What's your tolerance for things going wrong when it comes particularly to carbon credits? Because we've seen so many scandals in that area. But speaking to NGOs, equally, they'll say, we have to start, it doesn't matter, of course you're going to get something. But for someone, an institution like the World Bank, I would imagine that reputationally, things can get really challenging.
There's no reward without risk. And you have to do that. And having said that, remember what we are trying to do with those 15 projects that I was talking about, forestry ones, are those where we are directly involved ourselves. I'm actually not trying right now to certify the quality of credits where I'm not involved. At least where I'm involved myself, I have a better chance of ensuring that the environmental integrity of that credit and the social integrity of that credit is something I can put my name to. That's where we're starting. I'm sure we'll make mistakes even there, but you have to start. And you have to make the progress of doing it with transparency. So if there is an error, you can fix it. That's what I'm trying to do.
How scalable do you think these initiatives are going to be?
Pretty much. I mean, the global carbon registries are really scalable if you get them going. And that'll create transparent carbon registries. The training of countries to be able to count their carbon credits correctly, I think 30, 35 countries is not enough. It has to be much larger. And frankly, all the multilateral institutions need to be putting their shoulder to the wheel on this together with common standards. Otherwise, it'll cause confusion. And I think there's work we can all do there with institutions. I think the idea of certifying the environmental and social integrity of these credits, that's harder to scale because it's linked to what projects I am doing. But if every multilateral bank does that of the projects they are doing, then over a period of time, you get to a fairly large number. And just to give you an example, from the 15 countries we are talking about with these carbon credits from forestry, we think we can generate about 125 million credits over the coming 4 to 5 years. Now, currently, those credits are trading for $5 or $6 a ton, which is nothing.
No.
If by certifying the integrity of
You would need them to trade at a multiple of...
Well, multiples of the 5 for sure.
Yes.
But if
10.
by certifying these, I can get them to go to 10 or 20. I'm not even talking about what people think is the price for carbon, 40, 80, 100, who knows. But even from 5 to 10 or 20, at 20, 125 million credits starts moving real money voluntarily to these countries. I think the idea of voluntary movement of money to countries that can help with carbon credits is the right way to go.